Hello everyone and welcome to the live stream. Today we are talking about 7 LGBTQ movies that were canceled after season 1, and it's quite interesting actually, so I'm excited to dive into it. To get started, I should let you know that this list comes from Out Magazine. They shared a list of 24 canceled shows after one season, LGBTQ shows, and I've whittled it down to the 7 that I'd like to talk about. There's no specific reason other than the fact that I've seen these programs and I have something to say about them. There are others on the list that I've seen and I just don't feel strongly enough to really comment on them in any way, shape, or form. So these are my 7 that I've picked as the highlights, and let's dive right into it. The first canceled show after one season is Boots. Now, I have to say, I kind of agree with this. I don't think it was a bad show. I think they did quite a good job with it, actually. But it feels like a limited series. It feels like it happened, and it was enough. And we saw what we needed to see. The story was told, I think. And sometimes I think that shows from the US in particular are designed in a way to go on forever. Whereas I think shows, certainly from the UK, oftentimes are marketed as limited series. They're planned to be one season only. And I think there's something beautiful about that sometimes. I think sometimes we don't need to keep going if the story is done. And I think with the case of this show, Boots, I think the story is done. I think what was needed to be said was said, and I think we should leave it where it is. I don't think it needs more. And, obviously I don't know the full reasons of why it wasn't continued. I think probably there was plans to continue it based on the marketing anyways, but I think it's enough. I think the story has been told. All right, let's move on to the second one. Mid-Century Modern. I want to like this show. I want to love this show, but it's hard to. I can understand why it was canceled after one season, because it just doesn't get there. It just doesn't quite work. The stars of the show are fantastic. I mean, the actors, they chose the right people. The casting was excellent, and clearly those artists are very good at what they do. However, I don't know if the story was strong enough. I don't know if the story really worked well enough to warrant a continuation. I think one season was enough. I don't even really think the first season really kind of got there. I think it was kind of meh. I think that maybe they tried to do the sitcom format, and perhaps this would have worked better as a non-sitcom format. It was silly, it was cute, but it didn't really go anywhere that we needed it to go. And I'm not super sure that it was clear who exactly was meant to be the audience of this show. So I think one season was enough. It was cute, I watched it, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to stick in your head years from now. So yeah, I think that's where we are with that. So next, we are going to Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies. So this one here, I think, did not need to be made. It did not need to be made. I think that sometimes when you have a really successful program or IP like Grease is, you just want to milk it and you want to make more, and you think there's so much more story to tell here. But this is another example where there isn't any more story to tell. Grease, the original, is the story. It's been made into many versions. Of course, you have the movie, you have the stage musical, and you also have, for example, when they did the live musical version with Vanessa Hudgens. I think that this is a scenario where those types of things, making a live musical version and such of the original, are ways to kind of spice it up and give us something fresh. But I don't think that we need Rise of the Pink Ladies. I don't think we needed Grease 2. I don't think we needed any of these incarnations. And I think that there's a reason that this is not renewed, because I just don't think it's interesting enough. I don't think the story is that good. I don't think the characters are that desirable. And I think it'll always be compared to Grease OG. and I think it just doesn't stack up. Let's move on. The next one, Smiley. Now this one I'm upset about. Smiley is fantastic. It's a great story. It's well told. It has hints of humor. It has hints of drama. I wouldn't say hints of drama. It has a lot of drama, in fact. It's a great story. The acting is incredible. And I have a theory that if this show was made in English, which it's not, but I watched it dubbed. Of course, you can watch it with subtitles. I think that if this show was made in English, it would have continued for many seasons. Also, if it wasn't Netflix that made it, it probably would continue for many seasons because Netflix has a history of kind of starting something and giving up on it. But having said that, Smiley is superb. It deserved a second season. A second season would have been fantastic. And it's sad to see that a second season didn't come out of this. I think probably somewhere around 3 seasons would have done this show justice. And I think it was just cut too short too soon. It's a beautiful, beautiful show. And it's complex. And it's interesting. And it's dynamic. And it's unpredictable. But it's also a little bit predictable, which kind of makes it cute. But overall, I think that not renewing this one was a massive disservice. Let's move on. The next one we are going to talk about is The New Normal. Now, this show, I think, was made at the wrong time on the wrong platform. It was made to be a TV show on kind of traditional TV. I think if it was a show that was first put on streaming, it would have done better. And I think it needed the right network to push it forward. The show was good. It verged on great, but it never reached excellent. You know, in a lot of ways, The New Normal and Mid-Century Modern, I put them in a similar category. I think that both of the shows kind of got somewhere, but they didn't fully get there. And I think that The New Normal, compared to Mid-Century Modern, it has more interesting characters, and I think is a little bit more of a potential winner. But it didn't get there. And I think that perhaps if it had been created a little bit later, perhaps if it had been created with a streamer in mind, perhaps if, you know, for example, some of the cast of Mid-Century Modern, if they were in The New Normal, I mean, that would have been great. I think The New Normal had the potential to be something that continued for many years, but it just I think was born at the wrong time. I think it was too soon, and I think that today, if it was launched, I think it would work. I think it'd be interesting, and I would love to see more of it. I think that some incarnation of it could exist once again. It probably would not use the same name. It probably would just be a fresh interpretation, but I think the ideas are there. But I do agree that it did not deserve a second season. Next is Uncoupled. Oh boy, how I wanted so bad to love this. How all the right pieces are in place, but it didn't work. It just wasn't interesting enough. And, you know, to come from Showtime, I mean, it kind of came from Netflix. I think it depended where you lived. It sort of looked like it came from different broadcasters or different streamers based on where you live, which tends to happen with a lot of shows, quite frankly. It just didn't get there. It was romantic, yes, sort of. It was funny, yes, sort of. I agree it shouldn't have been placed on another season. I just don't think it was strong enough. I think that there really wasn't a way to make it strong. I think some elements of the characters are just not relatable, and they're just not so likable. I think it's hard for me to like these characters in a lot of ways. I think they just didn't quite hit the mark. I think there was a way it could have worked, but I don't think that there's anything they could have done to make a second season desirable to me. Next, and last on the list, is Queer as Folk. Now, this is a show that I absolutely think deserved many more seasons. This, of course, is a new reimagining of the original US Queer as Folk, which was preceded by the UK Queer as Folk before that. Now, the UK Queer as Folk and the US Queer as Folk are already different enough from each other. And then, of course, you have this new US Queer as Folk, which is a whole new breed. Breed's an interesting word in this scenario. If you're gay, you know what I'm saying. I think the problem with this is that the US Queer as Folk really was more gay and lesbian as folk. It really was about being gay and discovering yourself and being lesbian and discovering yourself. And those storylines were heavy. Those storylines were strong. I think more than anything else, it was a show made for gay men. I think that it obviously had lesbians in it. But I think overwhelmingly it was probably a show that was watched more by gay men than lesbians. I think, you know, the launch of shows like The L Word were probably a little bit more intended for lesbians. I think lesbians definitely watched Queer as Folk, for sure they did. But I think that because the primary structure was gay male oriented, I think that's who watched it. Now, with the new Queer as Folk that only got one season, I think the thing is it actually was Queer as Folk. It was tackling non-binary and trans stuff. It was tackling stuff that was new. It was tackling stuff, like hate and violence in the LGBT community in a way that felt very now and very present. And perhaps that was his detriment, because perhaps it felt dated quickly. Perhaps it felt like it was meant for the time it was released and that it couldn't evolve. But I would argue that the original Queer as Folks did the same thing. They were very timely. If you watch them back now, you go, yeah, that was the time, and the time is not now. And I think that there's a space for these shows. I think Queer as Folk was Queer as Folk. I think if the original show was called Gay as Folk and this one was called Queer as Folk, people would have got it and it would have worked. But I think because people were comparing it to the original, it wasn't quite the same, and that didn't jive with people. I think the characters in the new Queer as Folk are fantastic. I think the way they filmed it, the way they shot it, the way they storied it out are fantastic. The actors are fantastic. I just think it's a great, great show, but perhaps in the wrong packaging. Perhaps it could have been Queer as Folk The Next Generation, similar to how Degrassi kind of had Degrassi The Next Generation. They kind of, Degrassi Next Class, they kind of added a bit of a something to tell you it's not quite the same, and we're going to give you new characters, we're going to give you new scenarios, but it's in the world of, I think also they could have instead, picked a new name and called it, From the World of Queer as Folk. You know how, like, for example, Spiral was from the Book of Saw? I think, a similar scenario here where it could have been something from the world of. But I think something as simple as Queer as Folk The Next Generation, or something that gave us the idea that we were going in a new path, I think would have worked. But regardless, I think the show is fantastic, and I think it should have continued. Should it have different marketing and packaging? I think so. But having said that, I think that it could have continued just as it was. I don't think there was anything inherently wrong with it, and I think it was cut off too soon. So, in conclusion, shall we say, I really do think that out of the ones on our list, Queer as Folk was definitely cut off too soon. Uncoupled did not deserve a second season. The New Normal almost deserved a second season, but not quite. Smiley definitely deserved many, many, many more seasons. Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies did not deserve a second season, and in fact, I'll go as far to say it should have never been made in the first place. Mid-Century Modern, it was cute, I'm glad it was made, but one season was enough. And Boots, I think, I won't even say that one season was enough, I will say that the story was told. Boots, definitely, there was enough that was said, and it felt like a limited series. And I think what it was what it was, and I was happy with it. So let me know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with me? I'd love to know. And of course, if you'd like to see more of what I create, you can watch my series, It's Complicated, The full season is now streaming on YouTube. It's a show I made a few years ago about two gay kids in high school discovering themselves, and is told primarily through music and social media. So there's very little dialogue. It's kind of like watching a music video and a TV show if they kind of had a baby. Music video, TV show had a baby. It's gay, and I'd love for you to check it out. Please do so. And of course, we will see you in the next video. Bye!